Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me. My name is José Arevalo and I'm the co-chair of Task Force number 3 of Evaluators. Welcome to Evaluators e-learning number 3. We're very glad to have 3 presenters today. The topic today is Adventures in Blunderland, Mistakes Made by Evaluators and the Lessons they learned from them. Thank you for joining us today. First of all, I want to present 2 short slides about how to use the virtual platform. Some of you have participated before, but for the new people joining us today, I will have a very short presentation. How do you select your language? I hope, well, right now I'm speaking in English, but this webinar is simultaneously translated into Spanish, French, and Russian. So if you can select your language in the bottom right corner, you can select and change your language to have a simultaneous translation. Also, for interacting, you have a chat feature in the right part of your screen. So please type your country, where you're from, your greetings, any questions that you have for presenters. We will be keeping track for the questions you have for the presenters and have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So please interact with each other. We really like the interaction with our participants. So I want to explain a little bit of our road to get to this Evaluators e-learning number 3. Evaluators as an initiative was launched in 2015 in Nepal in the Global Evaluation Forum, which is part of Evaluators. And in early 2016, the task force number 3 was created. This is the task force that is in charge of creating these webinars and the virtual conferences. Then we appointed co-chairs and a secretariat. And in December 2016, we had our Evaluators first virtual conference, which was named Building Bridges to Evaluation Practice. In October 2017, we had the first e-learning webinar, and in November 2017, we had our second virtual conference, Finding Your Place in the Evolving World of the Evaluation. I hope you joined us there as well. And in January 2018, we had our Evaluators e-learning number 2, and we're now in February and have our e-learning number 3, which we're very glad that you have joined us today. We want to also share some of the participant characteristics. We had 332 people registered for this webinar, and that's a great number. So you can know, we have 73 countries participating today. The mean age of the people that registered were 36, and the mean years of experience in Evaluator is 5. 77% of the people that registered have the evaluation as the main focus of their studies or their work, and 43% are part of a voluntary organization of professional evaluators or a national network of evaluators. So we want to give thanks to Evaluators and our great presenters today. We have Kylie Hutchinson, Susan Igras, and Isaac Castillo. So thank you very much. And we also want to thank our Evaluators leadership, Bianca Montrose-Moorhead, Marie Gervais, and Khalil Bitar. You always support us, and we're very thankful for that. We also have our Task Force 3 leadership. It's myself, José Arevalo, Sofía Esteves as co-chairs, and Antonina Risco Procescu as secretariat for our task force. We also want to thank our Task Force 3 members who are very active and have made this possible. Daniel Ducay, Sarah Osmain, Imad Haroun, Gerardo Sanchez, Ana Erika Lareza, and Kelsey Chola. Thank you very much for all your help in making this a reality. So this was my very short introduction. Thank you for being here. We have 3 great presenters, and in order, we will have first a presentation from Isaac Castillo, then Susan Igras, and the third presentation will be by Kylie Hutchinson. Each one of them will present 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll have at the end a question and answer session. So please type any questions you may have in the Q&A, in the chat feature. Also, we will have a poll. The presenters have 3 questions for our audience, I will post right now In the chat feature, you can see a Google form link. So please answer to the 3 questions our presenters have posted there. And at the end of the presentations, we will have the results of your answers. So thank you very much. I will like to first introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker today is Isaac Castillo, and he's the Director of Outcomes Assessment and Learning at Venture Philanthropy Partners. Isaac has over 20 years of performance management, evaluation, and outcome measurement experience, and he currently manages, refines, and evolves VPP's approaches and processes related to data collection, data reporting, and outcome measurement. Prior to coming to VPP, Isaac served as the Deputy Director of the DC Promise Neighborhood Initiative and as a Senior Research Scientist at Child Trends, where he worked with nonprofits throughout the United States on the development and modification of performance management systems and evaluation designs. In addition, Isaac was also the Director of Learning and Evaluation for the Latin American Youth Center, where he led the organization's evaluation and performance management work. You can now follow Isaac on Twitter as well as at Isaac Outcomes. So thank you very much. We will have our first presentation now.
I can see myself, so that's a good thing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentations. We wanted to give all of you a sense of some of the trials and tribulations and lessons that we've learned throughout our evaluation careers. We are a little bit more advanced, a little bit more seasoned as evaluators, I think, than some of you out there, and we really want to share some of the learnings and mistakes and comedy and errors that we've experienced as learning for all of you as you continue on your evaluation career. So I'm going to start out with my presentation and providing you with a little context into exactly who I am. I will then talk about the evaluation in question, and then I will get to some of my personal bloopers and what I learned from them. I do want to start with this question to make sure that everyone has answered it in the Google form. Just quickly, if you can take a few seconds to potentially answer this question. We'll talk more about it as we go through, but we really wanted to get a sense of how many of you have experienced some sort of failure, challenge, mistake, crisis in your evaluation work. And as you answer that question, I'm going to give you a little background on myself because I think it's important to frame my examples. Even though my entire professional career I've worked in Washington, D.C. in the United States, I was born in El Paso, Texas, in the southwestern part of the United States, right on the border with Mexico. El Paso is right across the border from Ciudad Juarez in Mexico. So my entire teenage and youth experience was very much lived between two communities, the very American English-speaking world and the very Latino, Mexican, Spanish-speaking world on the other side of the border. All of my grandparents came originally immigrated from Mexico, and I grew up in a bilingual English-Spanish household where we talked predominantly a combination of what's called Spanglish, but it was a combination of English and Spanish. And as I became older, I became more aware that the border Spanish that was spoken there in El Paso wasn't the proper Spanish, or even wasn't the same Spanish that was spoken in a number of other communities throughout the world. That's an important lesson, and keep that in mind as we continue through our example. So the evaluation I wanted to talk about was an initiative that was funded by the United States Department of Justice that was focused on collecting qualitative information on gang members throughout the United States. These were youth who had recently joined a gang, but these were also the leaders, also referred to as sometimes the shot callers, but the ones who were really running the gangs. And it was designed to collect information on why these individuals joined the gangs and potentially what would need to be done to get them out of the gangs. The research study was conducted across 6 major cities throughout the United States, in various cities across the U.S. and in different parts of the United States. And I was in charge of the vast majority of the interviews that were being done. I personally conducted over 200 interviews with gang members and gang leaders. And I also was responsible for conducting the majority of the Spanish language interviews, and that also included the development of the interview guides and all of the questions in both English and Spanish. So that's what the evaluation was. That was what I was tasked to do. The majority of the interviews that were conducted in English came at the early part of this evaluation, and the 2 cities where we conducted predominantly Spanish interviews were held until the end of the evaluation. They were the last 2 cities that we ended up going towards. So I wanted to share 3 challenges or bloopers or examples of my time doing this particular work with this evaluation. And I wanted to start with an example at the very beginning. So early on, I had an interesting dynamic happen where I was simply greeting some of the participants in Spanish and using a very traditional greeting, "Siéntate, por favor," the traditional Spanish used in the Mexico and USA border communities. And what I quickly came to realize when I got a few sort of side glances by people is that I was offering a greeting in Spanish that wasn't quite what they were used to or what they're expecting. Particularly when I first started the interviews, I wasn't aware that a lot of the gang members I was speaking with had immigrated to the United States from El Salvador and other parts of Central America, where the greeting or the term "sit down, please" was "sentate, por favor." So it may not seem like a big deal. It's literally the difference of 1 letter, but that sort of oversight on my part and not getting a good enough sense of who I was going to be interviewing and sort of which Spanish I should be using just started all of these interviews off on not the right foot. It just created a sort of a sideways glance or a level of, I wouldn't say distrust, but a level of, it didn't just start the interviews off in the best way. And I think upon reflecting on it, it seems like such a little thing, but these little things really do make a difference, especially as an evaluator trying to establish credibility with a community or with a group of people that you don't regularly interact with. And in particular, for this example, it's a community or group of individuals that are very, very, very suspicious of outsiders, as you can imagine gang individuals would be. So right off from the beginning, a number of these interviews were starting in not such a great place. Then, as we continued the interviews, there were a number of questions that were really focused on asking the youth about their friends, about the types of activities that they engaged in, but also what their friends are doing, what their friends are experiencing, why their friends are in gangs, why their friends potentially got out of gangs, if they do have friends who got out. And you know, the common way that you refer to friends in Spanish is using the term amigo. And I think, you know, that is a very common term. I would think that most of the colleagues that are on the line now in Mexico and Spain and other Spanish-speaking countries would know that amigo is a pretty common way to refer to his friend in Spanish. But in El Salvador and certain parts of El Salvador and Central America, the preferred term is chero. And so again, this was another situation where I was using terms that were perfectly fine, perfectly legitimate in terms of the true translation of the word, but there were cultural or contextual issues that I hadn't thought about ahead of time or that I didn't take the time to really talk through with some local context on the ground to get a better sense of why using the word chero would be a much better way to establish trust and a connection with these individuals. Rather than using sort of the traditional, more commonly used amigo. Again, may not seem like such a big difference or a big deal, but this layered on top of the first example really started to cut against a little bit of my credibility with some of these gang members who are now starting to think that I don't have a good appreciation of where they come from or the experiences that they've been going through. Even despite those 2 examples and these 2 bloopers, and it took a while for me to sort of understand them and move on and incorporate some of the better language choices, most of these interviews for the most part went fine. I do want to share one final example because I do think that it does offer a really good insight into even just casual interactions with people that can also lead to delicate situations. And so for my third example, I want to share a story with this particular type of bakery item. I had finished an interview with a high-ranking gang leader in the neighborhood where he was, And we were walking out of the space where we did the interview, and we happened to pass a bakery, a very traditional bakery. And I looked into the window, and growing up, this is one of my favorite pastries. It's a favorite of mine and of my family. And so I looked in, and I casually asked this individual, would you like to come in and join me for this pastry? And when I grew up, the name of this particular pastry was known as a concha, because it looks like a shell. And so I asked this individual, do you want to come inside the bakery and join me for a concha? And he, and by this time the rest of his gang had showed up, gave me some very, very quizzical looks. And he asked me to repeat what I said. And again, I said, would you like to join me inside for a concha? And they all just started to break out laughing, uncontrollable laughter. And once they stopped laughing, they explained to me that although technically, they understood what I was talking about, in their Spanish, where they're from, the term concha is a derogatory term used to refer to genitalia. And so they quite literally, for a second, thought they wanted me to join them inside for genitalia. It's a funny story. It definitely is a blooper. Nothing, harsh came out of it, but it was a good reflection on how language choices, not being careful with the language, could potentially lead to very delicate or inappropriate situations. And, in this instance, I had sort of let my guard down and wasn't thinking about pure language choice, and could have used the much more widely accepted term a pan dulce, a sweet bread, but I just sort of let it slip, and it turned into a very funny but very memorable situation. And I wanted to just share these three examples because I think as much as we all think that we have an appreciation, especially based on where we grew up, of language and the importance of language and how important language is to our evaluation work, it is important for us as evaluators to always recognize that we do have limitations and we have blinders on and filters on with the work that we do. And it is always critically important to remember to engage our local contacts and have conversations with people locally to get a sense of what is good language to use and what may be inappropriate language to use in evaluation situations. And so I share these examples to encourage you to always think about language choice formally and informally, to remember to have these sorts of conversations with your local contacts, to ask questions if they don't share this information ahead of time, all in the spirits that you can avoid your own contra moment in your evaluation work. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Susan, or even to take a couple questions in between.
Isaac, for this great presentation. I think we will keep the questions for the end, but please, I would like to ask the audience, if you have any questions, type them now and we will keep track of them, and we'll have the Q&A session at the end. So thank you, Isaac, and I would like to introduce you now to our second presenter today, Susan Igras. I hope I pronounced the last name correctly, has over 25 years of international health and development experience in the US, Africa, and Haiti, working in NGOs and ministries on program planning and evaluation research of community-centered social and behavior change interventions aiming to improve sexual and reproductive health of adolescents and adults. At Georgetown University's Institute for Reproductive Health, Susan works as a senior advisor, providing strategic guidance for monitoring, learning, and evaluation of norms-focused interventions going to scale under the Passages Project. She received her Master's of Public Health degree from Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. Susan worked previously as an international health evaluation consultant and in longer-term leadership positions with CARE International, the Global Health Council, and Catholic Relief Services. Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us today. I will now give the floor to you.
Hi, everybody. I am just trying to get the presentation up. Good, thanks. Hi, everybody. Really happy to be here. I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that Isaac was talking about, and then go share some of my experiences and some of my blunders. A lot of my blunders are around assumptions that I made as I was going into a participatory evaluation. As someone who, at the time of this evaluation, I was working for an international NGO. I was based in Nairobi, and I was being called to work in another country to lead a participatory evaluation. So I'm going to talk about that. And the blunders I made about people and places and how that affected, not necessarily in bad ways, but really created some really learning reflection points on my own as I was moving forward. So the question I have for you, because a lot of my experience and my assumptions were around soft skills and soft skills that you bring to your evaluations. So, you know, we talk about teamwork, but communication, listening, empathy, creative thinking, managing conflicts, these are all things that you might need to bring out into play as you're doing the evaluation. And that's some of the things that happened in this little study I'm going to show you. So I was actually called in to work in a country. It was with the same NGO that I was working with, but into their country program, to help do a midterm evaluation, a participatory evaluation of a project that was aiming to increase family planning use. So the context of this country was that it was mostly rural communities, very simple infrastructure in terms of education and health services, but also had a big rapid population growth, and the government was concerned and wanted to really promote family planning. So the organization I was in developed a really interesting sort of ethnographic, incremental approach to try and increase the social acceptability and increase use of modern methods for people who were interested in spacing births. And the idea was that there would be a field agent that would go to different villages, spend 3 months there working with elders to increase the social acceptability of family planning, and then create some linkages with health services so that after 3 months they would leave to a new village, but the activities would continue in the old village. So it was being piloted in 3 districts in this country, and with really good results. And the idea was the ministry was really interested, if it worked well, to expand it. And so I was called in to lead a midterm evaluation, and we decided we wanted it to be participatory. The government, the donor, the NGO I was working with were all really on board. It was going to be a friendly evaluation, and so we designed it in a way so that there would be just a small core team, 3 people from the Ministry of Health, 3 from the NGO, including the project manager, an extension coordinator, and a field person, and then me as the team lead. And we were really going to be participatory in the sense that the core team was going to be there to help design the evaluation, the questions, the tools, collect data, and analyze, and then be joined with a larger group of people to interpret results. And it was very mixed methods. So we started, I want to go back. We started in the capital where the office was, the main office of the NGO was, and we went through, what is evaluation, what are we trying to get out of this evaluation, and started moving to designing our questions and then moving into question guides. And by day 3 of this sort of 4 or 5 day working to sort of set up, prepare the evaluation, in the middle of these meetings with my team, all of a sudden things got really strange. And I didn't quite understand, like, what is going on? Everyone was asking very pointed questions. They were worried about something. So midway through this meeting, I just stopped and I said, what is wrong? And after a lot more discussion, it became really clear that the word evaluation was really threatening to people. In the past evaluations that they had been involved in, there were repercussions. You could get really sanctioned if you didn't have good results, and so they're really worried. So after a little more discussion, I said, well, what if we called it a different name? And we ended up calling it a midterm review, and everyone was fine, and we moved on. But my first blunder was assuming that evaluation had a good connotation in everyone's mind, and that's not necessarily was the starting point. The second, the second blunder I made, and again another assumption, was that I could create a team with the people who were given to me as part of this team, which I didn't choose. They were already named before I got there. That I could help elevate them to a level of evaluation skills that they might not have had. None of these people were evaluators or had been trained in evaluation. So they were all very highly skilled technical people in health, but evaluation was new to them. And we were now in the field going through, we had a 10-day data collection plan going through the 3 districts. And about the second day, and every evening we would meet and just sort of go over as a team like the issues that we were facing. But it was really clear that the doctors in the group, the three people from the MOH, really were poor at interviewing and at taking notes. You would look at their field notes, the interview notes, and it looked like prescriptions from, that they were writing for their patients. So, we tried to improve that in working with them, but it was pretty clear that they were never going to get to the level of skill that was really important. And so that was just a big assumption on my part that, you get the team that you get, and then how do you then understand what their skills are, what their motivations are, and then work with what you have. And, in the end, we compensated by giving more of the interviewing to people who were better at note-taking and let the doctors be a little more, work on other things. But it was an interesting lesson for me. And I guess the biggest lesson in the title of this presentation is this missing in action. And this was, so part of the participatory team was the project manager of the INGO. And she was the one who was going to really lead forward any recommendations, changes that came out of this evaluation that we were in the midst of doing. And from the very beginning, it seems sort of strange. She wasn't really there for the week in the Capitol of planning for the evaluation. She was always off doing, organizing things, doing logistics, and we got into the data collection phase in the project sites, and again, she was hardly ever there. I mean, she was physically absent a lot of the time, and when she was with us, she was really mentally just absent. And it was really unclear to me what was going on. My assumption and my blunder of an assumption was that she would want to be there because she was the person who was going to lead forward the changes. But that was a big assumption. At one point, I just took her aside and I said, why are you never here? What is going on? What's wrong? And she never really gave me a good answer. And so that put me in a delicate position. Do I approach her supervisor? Because she was actually threatening in some ways the sex of our evaluation. So I ended up going to her supervisor and talking. And she soon left the evaluation team, came back at the end, but actually eventually left the organization, like a couple of months after our evaluation ended. So I always wondered if I had handled that well, thinking cross-culturally, what should I have done? The other thing that the other blunder I made was, well, not a blunder, but I do wonder, again, in a cross-cultural sense, if I should have talked with the evaluation team. We all saw what was going on, but we never actually talked about it as a team. Could I have used that as a way as a sort of an evaluation learning moment? But in the end, I didn't do that, but I did contact her supervisor. So it's interesting, in retrospect, one of the big learnings I took, which continues to this day for me, is understanding history and social and political history. Because the people the whole team that I was working with were part of a society that had really only moved away from a pretty feudalistic, punitive structure about one generation earlier. So it still permeated, fear and retribution still permeated a lot of what people were doing. And I think now, every time I go to a new place, and I do a lot of work in other countries, I take time to understand some of the political and social history, to read, to try and understand and talk with people beforehand. So because that really makes a difference in how an evaluation will play out, as well as these other kind of soft skill dynamics. But just being really more cognizant of that really helps, I think, build cultural competency. So that's sort of it. That was my experience. Some blunders. In the end, the evaluation worked out well. Even the team sort of worked better once the project manager was out, and our results were used to improve the project going forward. And so that was really positive, and I think people really started understanding better evaluation, which is the value and advantage of a participatory approach, where you're trying to build evaluation capacity while doing an evaluation. I just wanted to show you, Isaac said where he is from. I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, but I've lived a lot of my life, my adult life, overseas. Those are some of the places. And that has definitely created different frameworks of understanding how to work in culture. How do you use soft skills in different cultural contexts, different organizational contexts, to really manage an evaluation effectively and get the best work done that you can. All right, thanks. So I think we hand it over to Kylie now.
Very much, Susan. I hope I didn't cut you off. I thought you had finished. Thanks for a great presentation. It's very inspiring, and it helps us a lot to learn from our mistakes. The next presentation will be by Kylie Hutchinson. I'm going to read her bio. Kylie Hutchinson is an independent evaluation consultant and principal of Community Solutions Planning and Evaluation. She took her first course in evaluation in 1988 and has been hooked ever since. Kylie has been a regular training on evaluation and program sustainability topics for the American Evaluation Association, the Canadian Evaluation Society, U.S. Centers for Disease Control, and through her own private webinars. Her passion is taking evaluation theory and translating it into practical resources for evaluators working in the trenches. She's the author of 3 books. The first one is A Short Primer on Innovative Evaluation Reporting. The second one, Survive and Thrive, 3 Steps to Securing Your Program Sustainability, and a multi-authored collection of stories on evaluation failures for Sage Publishers, coming fall 2018. Kylie tweets frequently on evaluation topics, and you can find her at Evaluation Maven on Twitter. Thank you so much, Kylie. We're really glad you were able to make it today, and we're really thankful for your presentation. I will give now the floor to you.
Thanks, Josette. Just waiting for my slides to pop up, and then we'll get going. I'm not sure I'm supposed to do something for the slides, am I? Okay, sorry, I just don't see them. Or is it, oh, sorry, am I supposed to have my own slides up? I thought I sent them to you. I'm a bit confused. Why can't I see my slides? They're already up. Okay, sorry, they're not on my screen. I'm still seeing Susan's slides.
The floor back. When you have control, when I give you the floor, you can click next on the slides. I'm gonna put your first slide here, and then you can control them just next to the video screen where you can see yourself. You can see an arrow, and you can control the slides yourself. I'll give the floor back to you.
Okay, sorry about that. There was a delay on my end seeing the slide. So here we are. Okay, so thanks everybody, and it's my turn to tell you my blunder. So I live in outside of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. That's on the west coast of Canada, and it's an interesting area. We have our very urban centers, but then we have a lot of rural and remote areas as well. So just a reminder, we had those 3 challenges or those 3 questions for you to answer in on the link. So if you've done that, that's great, and we'll review those afterwards. So I want to tell you about where I live. So in British Columbia, about 6 or 7 years ago, somebody made the realization that 25% of our family physicians were slated to retire in the next 5 years. And you can imagine that, you know, this is real cause for concern in any country because in British Columbia, where I live, it's a large province and it has a lot of rural and remote areas where we really struggle to find doctors. And I know a lot of you on the webinar today have a similar situation in your country as well. You might be surprised that in a country like Canada, we have the same problem. But finding and keeping new doctors in these areas is really hard. Sorry, and I know I'm really a fast talker, so I have to slow down. This is Dease Lake. This is in the northern part of British Columbia. It's on the border with Alaska and Yukon. And you can see there's not much there to attract a new doctor and their family. And it's really hard you may be able to get them there, but it's hard to keep them there for a long period of time for a multitude of reasons. Now, several years ago, one of the contracts that I had was to provide evaluation support to a high-level committee that was formed to address the problem of recruiting and retaining doctors in rural and remote areas of British Columbia. And the longer I sat at this table, the more I realized how incredibly complex the issue of recruiting and retaining rural doctors is. And I wanted to somehow kind of communicate this complexity to this high-level committee. And I wanted to do it to help them think more strategically and also better define the boundaries of the evaluation that I was doing for them in terms of evaluating their impact in recruiting and retaining rural doctors. So to communicate this complexity, I automatically thought of a systems map. And if you're familiar with systems map, they're a common tool that's used to visualize complexity. So I spent a couple of days at my desk developing this systems map, and it's actually a causal loop map. And I have to tell you, I had a lot of fun doing this exercise, pulling in all of the elements that impact physician recruitment and retention. And I was feeling pretty proud of what I had done at the end of these 2 days. And dare I say, I was smug. I was feeling incredibly smug. And I have to tell you that sitting on this committee with a bunch of doctors, they really didn't care that I was an evaluator. They didn't care about evaluation, and evaluation capacity building was one of my challenges that I had to do with this group. These guys were doctors. You know, there was a certain amount of ego around the table, and they couldn't care less about me, this little person. They really thought maybe I was admin or something like that. So when I had produced this map, I was thinking, yeah, this is the thing that is really going to help them understand the complexity of what they're dealing with and be more strategic. But to be honest, I also thought that I might get a little bit of recognition and a little bit of respect for the work that I do. So to explain it a little bit more, I put all of the barriers to physician recruitment and retention in red, and I put all of the enablers in blue. And as I was doing this in my office, all of these insights and strategies and leverage points, they were jumping off the page at me. It was an incredibly exciting and insightful exercise. And to me, it was so clear where this committee needed to intervene. It was so simple. It was incredibly simple. Now, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Kevin Costner movie, Field of Dreams, but there's a saying in this movie, if you build it, they will come. And I had the same idea that if I develop this systems map, my committee will have insights, develop conclusions, suggest strategy, right? It was so simple. So I proudly printed it on A3 paper, 11 by 17 paper. I put it as a placemat at each member's desk. And when it came time to present, there's a bit of a spoiler here, but I I gazed around the room, I presented my map, and I was ready to facilitate all this kind of deep and meaningful conversation on the issue. And these are the looks that I got from everyone sitting around the table. So I heard people mumbling and saying things like, it's kind of overwhelming. And one manager, who I know was extremely sharp, just looked at me point blank and said, I don't get it. So my next step was I tried enlarging it as a poster and I brought it to the next meeting. And I thought maybe if it's bigger, they would see its true genius. But they still didn't use it. They didn't even look at it. And now it's just sitting in my office, not doing anything. And, you know, this really affected my reputation and my credibility on the committee. And I really needed some points in this area, and I got quite the opposite. I think I damaged my reputation. So a few months later, I was participating in the American Evaluation Association's, they have a Systems in Evaluation TIG, Topical Interest Group, and they had a virtual conference. And I went to one of the breakout groups on tools and strategies for systems visualization. And I told this story, and somebody in the group said, well, maybe they're a better investigative tool than a communications tool. And I thought, I think you might be right. Maybe my original idea of a systems map was totally wrong. So I ask all of you on this webinar today, could you understand something like this if it was given to you in a report or as part of a meeting package? Or would you actually take the time to figure it out yourself? Or if somebody gave it to you to discuss? So what about something like this? So personally, when I look at figures like this, my brain just shuts off and I really just say, what the, you know, expletive, which I can't say on a webinar, right? But I don't bother. I don't know about you. So I realized in retrospect that it was the practice of me thinking through the complexity myself and identifying the different connections and the enablers and the barriers that made the leverage points and the strategy so easy to see. I realized it's the process, not the product. So my learning and my takeaway for you is don't do it alone. And of course, I should know this because engaging stakeholders is one of our primary ways as evaluators that we increase utilization, right? It's like a real head smack. I should know this. And oh, sorry, I was just going to say that, you know, doing it together helps people better understand what's going on in the system, identifying all of the elements impacting the issue, and identifying those root problems. And this brought to mind this saying that Richard Beck said back in the 1980s, and this is a real mantra for me in evaluation all the time. People support what they helped create. So now I'm just waiting for another opportunity to do another systems map, but this time I'm going to do it with a group of stakeholders, not for them. And this time I'm going to try something similar but slightly different called a rich picture. I'm going to experiment with this. A rich picture is like a systems map, but most people can absorb more from a picture of a complex subject rather than text or, heaven forbid, a bunch of arrows swirling around on a page. Rich pictures are great because they integrate different perspectives from different stakeholders into one picture, and they can be very explicit about things like conflict and politics and emotions. And this is really important. They don't have to be slick. They just have to be meaningful for the people that are going to use them. So that was my little blunder and journey into the land of systems maps. And you know, this saying comes to mind: good judgment comes from experience, and experience, well, that comes from good judgment. So I wanted to just give you all a little heads up about a multi-author book that I'm editing in collaboration with Isaac and Susan and 20 other evaluators, very well-known evaluators, names that you would all know, like Stephanie Evergreen and Hallie Pruskill and Jane Davidson, who have all shared a story or a failure that they've done. So that's being produced right now, and it should be ready in fall of 2018. So that's me. So over to you, Josette, I guess.
Much, Kylie. This was a great presentation. All three presentations were amazing, and I think we all learned a lot. We have now about 10 minutes for Q&A, for questions and answers. We have some questions for each one of the presenters that have been posted on the chat feature. But if there are more questions, please type your questions in the chat feature, and we can include them if we have some time. The first question is for Isaac. I'll give you 2 questions, and maybe then 2 questions for Susan and 2 for Kylie. I hope the time is enough for doing this. So the first question for Isaac is, at a more significant level, as someone who may appear to be part of the establishment, how were you able to get gang leaders willing to talk with you? That was the first question. And the second question is, how did you identify the gang members, and how did you deal with voluntary consent? I'll give the floor to Isaac, and then I'll read some questions for the other 2 presenters.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we went through our local contacts in each of the communities to help identify who the gang members were. And so these were people who either were former gang members themselves or had interactions with gang members. And so they had established trust, and they're the ones who recruited these active gang members to come and participate in the interviews. They helped to set the stage also so that we could do the consent process with them. And so when I came in to do these interviews personally, every single one of these gang members had multiple interactions with local contacts explaining what we were going to talk about, what the information was going to be used for, that it was not going to be shared with the police or other criminal justice organizations. So the local contacts were very, very important in both of these instances for both these questions. That being said, it did take a lot of work for me personally to just establish a level of comfort and trust with each of the gang members when we were doing the interviews. And I think one of the questioners used a great word. I was seen as often part of the establishment, or seen as the man or an arm of the police or the federal government. And I had to do a lot of work ahead of time, so much so that we built in 15 minutes at the very beginning of every interview to just establish trust, establish a rapport, get people comfortable with me. I told a lot of my backstory about what we were using the evaluation for, some previous work, to establish that trust, to get the youth and young adults to the point where they were comfortable sharing some very sensitive information for me. But I could not have done any of that without the good work of the local contacts before I even set foot in those respective cities.
Much, Isaac. We have a couple of questions for Susan. The first one is, how did you deal with the cross-cultural suspicion of external evaluators? And the second one is, what are your suggestions for emerging evaluators, which are new evaluators from other fields of study, to develop the necessary skills to avoid these important mistakes? I will give the floor to you now.
Avoiding cross-cultural suspicion of external evaluators, I think that's something that always happens, and at least at a minimum, people need to understand who you are as a person, develop trust, feel that you're credible, and how you do that is through the way you interact with people, and employ some of these soft skills, like really be a listener and really try and draw out from other people. You don't have to always be the big boss. and in some ways I think that's a helpful tone to be trying to set. That's the other nice thing. I mean, in this particular case that I shared with you, I was sort of in between. I was part of the NGO, so I was an insider to the organization, but I was an outsider to the people in the country I was working with. And so being an insider to the organization already gave me a certain credibility, but that wasn't enough, and I needed to do more. But I think that also this credibility issue is the beauty of participatory evaluations also in these kinds of settings, because I was the only non-national. I was the only person who wasn't from the country where the evaluation was happening. So there was credibility within the evaluation team and trust within the evaluation team that I think helped offset any other kind of suspicions that were there. So suggestions for new evaluators. I mean, part of it is always to be checking your assumptions, because we all go in with assumptions about who we are, who the people we're working with are, who the program, and you just have to always be alert and questioning yourself as you go forward, and be flexible and be willing to change directions and change assumptions, so that as you move things forward, you remain relevant to the task. And also having, understanding this range of soft skills, which I really think are critical for any kind of evaluation, and it doesn't matter what sector you're working in. And being, what you're often taught, what we are often taught in school is, how to do good teamwork, but there's a whole other set of skills that I mentioned earlier that you need to think about. I mean, being political, being empathetic, being listening and understanding, and having, and understanding when you should speak or not speak, when you should remain silent, who you should speak to. All of these things are part of what you need to do as you're managing evaluations, no matter where you are. So I think those are my answers. Thanks.
For your answers, we have 2 questions for Kylie. I don't think we'll have more time, but we have several questions up in line, but hopefully you can contact the people, the presenters, and maybe they can help answer these questions afterwards. The first question for Kylie is, this map, referring to the systems map, is not, among other things, the map of the theory of change. If not, what is the difference? And the second one is, what are the different tools used in an evaluation, and if possible, to highlight the threats and opportunities? Before I give the floor back to Kylie, I just wanted to let you know about the poll we put there, and the questions that audience answered. We had 28 responses, and I will try to share the screen. Bear with me just a second. I haven't done this before, so maybe you can take a look. I don't know if you can see my screen yet. Please let me know if you can see my screen, or if you can hear me still. Not yet. There's a bit of a delay. Okay, let me see if I can share. Okay, I don't think it's working right now, so I'll read them to you. For the first question, have you ever experienced a failure, mistake, challenge in evaluation before? 75% said yes, but I survived it. Around 18% says yes, and I'm still a mess. Just a tiny bit of people, 3.6 said no, not yet, and not sure, at 3.6% as well. For the second question, how would you best characterize the nature of this failure, mistake, or challenge? The first one, I'm not going to read them all, but maybe the first and second one. The first one is relationships. For example, engaging stakeholders, communication, challenging program. And the second one was methods. We have also reporting and use, evaluation management, and evaluator skills. And for the third questions in the poll was, how do you deal with such challenges? 57% said talk to an evaluation colleague or boss. So I think this give us a sense of what all of us have experienced in our blunders. And I'll give now the floor to Kylie. I also typed the questions if you forgot them in your chat feature. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Josette. So I believe the first question is, what's the difference between a theory of change and a systems map? So the systems map is just slightly more complex. I think a theory of change can range from being the very basic log frame or logic model, which is incredibly linear and doesn't take into account all of the factors or elements in the system surrounding the issue that is trying to be addressed. A theory of change can also be more extensive, and it includes things like assumptions or conflicts or things like that. But a systems map is trying to kind of visually display this. A lot of people put their theory of change detail into text, and I really like a systems map for being a picture. Now, there's different forms of systems mapping, and there's a great resource by FSG. I'll try to find the link for people on different types of systems maps. So the one that I used was a causal loop, but you can see that I had many different elements impacting that issue of the impact or the success that we were looking for that would not typically be included in a theory of change. Interested to know if anybody else on the call has anything else to add to that. In terms of tools for identifying threats and opportunities, there's all sorts of different ones out there. I mean, the typical SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I think that the takeaway is whatever tool that you use, just don't do it alone, right? However you want to put it to people, you say, if this is what we're trying to achieve, what are elements that could interfere with this? What might be some barriers or what might be some enablers? And I have to tell you that when I am thoughtful and involve stakeholders in this process, they are all too knowledgeable about what these are. Because if you ask any program staff person, they're intensely familiar with some of the negative or some of the barriers out there that are going to impede their progress because they're conscious of this. So I think, for example, I used to work in Zambia where we had we put the elementary school curriculum onto a tablet, and the staff kept coming up to me and saying, yeah, but what happens if girls don't go to school? Things like that. I just wanted to make a quick comment, and I'm conscious of the time, that the 18% of you who said, yes, you've experienced an evaluation failure and you're still a mess, I just want to say take heart, because as you can see from the numbers, we all go through these failures. I can think of 3 doozies in my career. So I started around 1998 on my own. And, I went to bed for a couple of days for the first one. It took me years before I would tell somebody about it. The most recent one, a couple years ago, my husband and I, we downed 2 bottles of wine just trying to help me get through it. So we take them hard, but you will get over it. And as time goes on, you will heal, you'll be able to reflect, and believe me, you'll actually be able to laugh about it. So yeah, back to you.
For these answers and for all your presentations. We had 3 great presenters today, and we're very glad that you could join us today. We have some closing slides. Just thank you again, Kylie, Isaac, and Susan, for your great presentations. And please, I just posted there in the chat box feature our post-webinar survey. Please help us and give us our feedback. It is very important for us to keep improving and to learn more about our mistakes as well. So thank you. And also we want to tell you to stay tuned. We have our e-learning webinar coming on March 8th. On March 8th, and it's going to be, the title is going to be Believe and Make It Happen, Lessons Learned and Hot Tips to Make Evaluations Gender Responsive. So please stay tuned and follow us at evalpartners.org/evalyouth and Twitter, Facebook, and thank you very much for everything. Stay tuned and help us with our post-webinar survey. Thanks a lot. Goodbye, everyone.